A strange upshot of Couldry and Mayhar's work is their argument that big data is deeply ideological precisely because it doesn't claim to be, and very few of us think of it as such. I mean, if your fridge runs out of beer and the fridge were able to reorder the beer itself without you there, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? Well, that's because big data is coded in a certain kind of language. We are encouraged to see big data as doing particular things. We are encouraged to see big data as stuff, as evidence which is simply there, which is created as a kind of natural resource, and it's only good for everybody if someone knows how to extract that resource and use it for society. But that, according to Couldry and Mayhar, is a deeply ideological argument that extracts value from us as media users without us really thinking about it or consenting to it, and creates new forms of power imbalances, or at least potential new forms of power imbalances. And this is where Bayne picks up in her work on digital learning. And particularly, she connects with Couldry over her argument that digital learning is surrounded by a particular kind of language which actively creates identities, subject positions, if you like, for teachers and learners. That has a profound effect on directing education in a particular way. And I suppose what her argument is that much of the debate about digital learning looks very directly at the functionality of platforms and doesn't think very much about the language that gives that functionality a particular meaning. What on earth does that mean? Well, we're right in the middle of this kind of situation right now. Yes, we can't be on campus together, so hey, no problem, we all use Zoom tutorials. Now, we know that the functionality of Zoom and the web has been somewhat overstated in terms of delivering online education. But most of our experiences in that direction are technical rather than ideological. You know, sometimes the technology simply doesn't work in the way that it says it's going to work. But that's not the problem that Bayne is talking about in her work on digital learning and why it's ideological. And her problem, for example, is that and it's not that she's arguing there's any conspiracy here, but that quite often there's a lack of consideration about what digital learning really can do because we surround it with the wrong language. And because we surround digital learning with the wrong language, that prevents us from asking important questions and the sorts of important questions that would actually make it work better. So, for example, she talks very specifically about the phrase um, technologically enhanced learning. And what she says is, well, there's something of a problem with that argument because it kind of suggests that there's a form of learning which exists, and then technology is rolled along and it simply makes that which exists work a little bit better. So it's as if we know who we are. We know what we are as students. We know what we are as learners. We know what we are as teachers. And technology simply helps us live those identities more fully, more completely, more efficiently. And what Bayne is saying is that she's not arguing that there's nothing wrong with, there's anything inherently wrong with digital learning. But what she is saying is that the language that surrounds digital learning pays too little attention to the way in which, as soon as you take learning online, you fundamentally transform the nature of education as a social space, and you fundamentally transform the nature of the relationship between teachers and learning. So actually, digital education isn't enhancing anything, it's transforming everything. It's creating a completely new environment, and we need a completely different language to talk about it and think about what is at stake. So when you take teaching online, you don't simply take a process that already existed and roll it out in a different way. You actually fundamentally create a whole new network of relationships that need to be reflected on. And this is something which changes the nature of education. And here, what Bayne is doing is harking back to some ideas that we encountered very, very early on in the semester. And this is the idea that when we shift the technologies that we use in the operation of everyday social life, we actually change the nature of the social. Different technologies aren't just different ways of doing the same thing. They are things which give a particular change, that create a particular change in the nature, the feel, and the texture of the social fabric. So, what she's saying is that digital learning is ideological in the sense that it's surrounded by a language that encourages us to see it as carrying on of eternal, long running teaching processes and relationships that have been around for centuries, rather than actually a transformation of the nature of the educational workplace. And you're sitting there going, maybe you're going, yeah, but what's that got to do with me? Well, it's got a whole lot to do with you, because your learning is being datafied and new strategies for learning are being created in reaction to the big data that you tell. So here is a PDF which shows the evidence that I can see about all of the resources that are on the ATS 3732 Moodle landing page and how often you're using them. So Moodle lets me tell a data story about you, about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And so this paints a picture of you. So the question is, do you recognize yourself in this data story? Now, I'm not saying that this data doesn't tell me anything about what you're doing in relation to Moodle. It tells me a lot of stuff that's really, really important. But also, following on from Couldry and Bayne, what we would need to say is we would need to say that it doesn't tell us everything that we need to know, and that in some ways it may be that this data is telling us a story which in many ways misrepresents your educational experience. So in the next video, what I'm going to be doing is applying a methodological lens to the discussion we've been having so far, to talk about how the concept of thick description provides us with a tool that we can use to do what Couldry wants us to do, which is to think critically and resist the way that big data takes our actions and our ambitions and extracts those ambitions and actions and makes them valuable for someone else.